8 separate times. That's how many times an assassin pointed a loaded gun right at Queen Victoria's face. A normal person would pass out. Victoria? She just casually popped open her umbrella as a shield, gave the shooter a death glare, and went right back out for a carriage ride the very next day. But dodging bullets like a royal superhero isn't what forged the most powerful female monarch of the 19th century. From a hyper-controlled little girl forbidden from walking downstairs alone, to the original goth queen mourning in black for 40 years, and finally, the mastermind whose tangled family web literally sparked a world war. Today, we are ripping the mask off so-called Victorian prudishness to see just how rebellious, stubborn, and absolutely savage this queen really was.
Welcome back to the BrainBoost English Podcast. Let's rewind the clock to Kensington Palace in the year 1819. Forget the glittering ballrooms, the magical fairy tales, and the glass slippers you see in Disney movies. For young Princess Alexandrina Victoria, royal life was more like a high-end, heavily decorated prison sentence. This was the era of the notorious Kensington system, a suffocating, incredibly toxic set of rules cooked up by her overbearing mother, the Duchess of Kent, and her mother's ridiculously ambitious advisor, Sir John Conroy. Their master plan was delightfully sinister: keep the little princess so isolated, so physically weak, and so entirely dependent on them that when she eventually took the crown, they would be the ones secretly pulling the strings from the shadows. Imagine being a teenager and having to share a bedroom with your mom every single night. You are not allowed to read a book unless it's strictly approved by the adults. You can't talk to strangers. You can't even walk down a flight of stairs without someone holding your hand, just in case you trip and ruin the royal investment. Victoria was wrapped in so much metaphorical bubble wrap she could hardly breathe. She was treated like a fragile porcelain doll. They wanted a mindless puppet, but oh boy, did they get a powerhouse instead. Fast forward to June 20th, 1837. The clock strikes 6 in the morning. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain arrive at Kensington Palace with some massive, life-altering news. The king has taken his final bow, departing this world, and 18-year-old Victoria is now the queen of the most powerful empire on the planet. Most teenagers would absolutely freak out, maybe have a panic attack, or immediately go on a shopping spree. Victoria? She immediately went to work. Her very first royal decree? She looked at her mother and simply said, "I want an hour alone. Just 1 hour of sweet, uninterrupted silence." It was the ultimate power move. And her second move was even better. She ordered her bed to be physically moved out of her mother's room. Talk about cutting the umbilical cord with a machete. The puppet strings were officially snipped, burned, and thrown out the window. Sir John Conroy, the scheming advisor who thought he was going to rule England, was basically told to pack his bags, get lost, and never show his face again. Victoria was in charge now, and she made absolutely sure everyone in the palace knew it. She quickly embraced the royal lifestyle. For the first time in her life, she was free. She started throwing lavish parties, staying up ridiculously late dancing until her feet hurt, and doing exactly what she wanted, whenever she wanted. She found a mentor and a father figure in her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, who taught her the ropes of politics while keeping her highly entertained with endless palace gossip. But ruling an expanding empire was a lonely job, and the political pressure was mounting. Everyone in Parliament expected her to get married immediately to secure the bloodline, but Victoria was enjoying her newfound freedom way too much to just settle down with any random prince they threw at her. Enter Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He was actually her first cousin, which sounds incredibly weird to us today, but back then, in royal circles, keeping it in the family was standard operating procedure. When Albert showed up in England, Victoria was entirely swept off her feet. According to her wildly detailed private diaries, she thought he was incredibly gorgeous, with beautiful blue eyes and a perfect mustache. But here is the massive catch about being the queen. Nobody is actually allowed to propose to you. It is considered terribly rude and a huge breach of protocol for a man to ask a reigning monarch to marry him. So, what did our fiercely independent queen do? She took matters into her own hands. In October 1839, she called Albert into a private room, nervously fumbled with her words for a moment, and then essentially said, "So, will you marry me?" Spoiler alert, he said yes. Let me tell you, their relationship was the complete opposite of the stuffy, boring, emotionally repressed image we usually associate with the Victorian era. Behind closed doors, Victoria and Albert were passionately, intensely, and sometimes fiercely in love. They had explosive, screaming arguments where Victoria would chase Albert down the hallways, followed by equally dramatic making up. They were basically the 19th century's original dramatic power couple. And the undeniable proof of their intense chemistry is in the royal nursery. They had 9 children together. 9! During her many pregnancies, which she actually deeply disliked and complained about constantly in her letters, calling it the shadow side of marriage, Albert had to step up to the plate. He gradually became her unofficial co-ruler, her most trusted political advisor, and the absolute backbone of the British Empire. Whenever she was too exhausted to deal with government ministers, Albert was there, organizing files, drafting letters, and pushing forward massive technological projects like the Great Exhibition. They became an unstoppable duo. He modernized the country's infrastructure, and she was the glowing, popular face of a golden era of prosperity. They set the ultimate standard for the modern royal family, projecting an image of domestic bliss and moral perfection to the public, while privately ruling half the globe. Life was absolutely perfect. A little too perfect, honestly, because if there is one thing history loves doing, it is throwing a massive, devastating wrench into the works just when things are going perfectly smoothly. And that unexpected wrench was about to send Queen Victoria into a downward spiral so dark, so obsessive, and so bizarre that the entire British monarchy would almost collapse under the sheer weight of her grief. You definitely don't want to miss what happens when the most powerful woman in the world completely loses her mind over love and starts making friends with some of the most controversial characters in British history. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the messy, unfiltered, and dramatic side of the past, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now to support the channel. The year was 1861, and the universe decided to deal Victoria the ultimate bad hand. Prince Albert, her rock, her co-pilot, and the absolute love of her life, caught typhoid fever. Despite the best efforts of 19th century doctors who, let us be honest, probably just prescribed fresh air and weird herbal soups, Albert took an early and permanent vacation from this world at the tragically young age of 42. Victoria was not just sad, she was utterly, comprehensively devastated. She did not just mourn, she turned grieving into an extreme, lifelong sport. For the next 40 years, she wore absolutely nothing but pitch black clothing. She became the ultimate, original goth queen of Europe. But she took it several steps further into the realm of the bizarre. Every single morning, she ordered her servants to lay out Albert's fresh clothes on his bed. They had to bring up a fresh bowl of hot water and a razor for his morning shave, as if he was just going to casually stroll out of the bathroom. The entire palace was basically frozen in time, trapped in a relentless loop of mourning. She completely withdrew from public life, refusing to open parliament or attend social events. The British public, who had previously adored their glowing royal couple, started getting really annoyed. They began calling her the Widow of Windsor, People were literally putting up signs on the gates of Buckingham Palace saying the building was for rent because the owner had abandoned it. The monarchy was starting to look incredibly fragile, and politicians were sweating bullets, fearing a revolution. They desperately needed to pull the Queen out of her endless depression. Enter John Brown. If you were looking for a delicate, refined gentleman to soothe the Queen's broken heart, John was the exact opposite of that. He was a rugged, whiskey-drinking, straight-talking Scottish servant who had previously worked for Albert. John Brown did not care about royal etiquette. He did not care about bowing correctly or speaking softly. He treated Victoria like a normal human being, which often meant bluntly telling her what to do and occasionally yelling at her when she was being stubborn. And Victoria absolutely loved it. He became her constant companion, her unofficial bodyguard, and her best friend. They rode horses together, they took long walks in the Scottish Highlands, and they were basically inseparable. Naturally, the British press and the highly judgmental royal court completely lost their minds. The gossip was explosive. People started maliciously calling her Mrs. Brown behind her back, spreading wild rumors that they were secretly married. The royal family hated him. The politicians hated him. But Victoria did not care. She finally found someone who made her smile again, and she was not going to let some stuffy aristocrats ruin her vibe. But John Brown eventually passed away too, leaving Victoria lonely once again. Enter controversial best friend number 2, and this one caused an even bigger earthquake in the royal household. In 1887, during her Golden Jubilee celebrating 50 years on the throne, 2 Indian servants were brought over to wait her tables. One of them was a 24-year-old clerk named Abdul Karim. Victoria, who was utterly fascinated by India and actually held the title of Empress of India despite never stepping foot there, took an immediate liking to him. Abdul was smart, charming, and told her fascinating stories about his homeland. Before anyone knew what was happening, Abdul was no longer just waiting tables. The Queen promoted him to be her munshi, which means teacher or clerk. He taught her how to speak and write in Urdu. He introduced her to authentic Indian curry, which she became completely obsessed with, and he became her closest confidant. If the royal court was mad about John Brown, they were absolutely, totally nuclear about Abdul Karim. Here was a young Indian man gaining massive political influence over the Queen of the British Empire. He was given a private carriage, prime seating at operas, and even a house on the royal estates. The rest of the royal family, especially Victoria's son, the future King Edward VII, threw massive temper tantrums. They threatened to resign, they plotted against Abdul, and they even tried to claim the Queen was losing her mind. How did Victoria react? She slammed her cane on the desk, yelled at her son, and swept all of their complaints right into the garbage. She protected Abdul with the fierceness of a mother bear, proving once again that nobody, absolutely nobody, tells Queen Victoria what to do. As Victoria entered her twilight years, she decided to shift her focus from controversial friendships to playing the ultimate game of geopolitical chess. Remember those 9 children she had with Albert? Well, they grew up and had 42 children of their own. Victoria realized that the best way to secure British power and prevent future wars was to basically monopolize the European gene pool. She became the grandmother of Europe, operating the most aggressive and high-stakes matchmaking service in human history. She shipped her kids and grandkids off to marry into the royal families of Russia, Germany, Greece, Romania, Spain, and beyond. She thought that if all the kings and emperors were cousins, they would never fight each other. I mean, family dinners might be awkward, but surely they would never start a global conflict, right? Well, spoiler alert for the 20th century, her master plan backfired spectacularly. When World War I broke out, the 3 main monarchs involved, King George V of Britain, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, were all Victoria's direct grandchildren. They used to play together in the gardens of her palaces. And yet, they ended up tearing Europe apart in one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. So, her attempt at creating world peace through marriage actually just created the most toxic family feud the world has ever seen. Looking back at her incredible 81 years of life and 63 years on the throne, it is time we completely throw away the boring stereotype of the Victorian era. When we hear Victorian, we think of strict morals, covering up table legs because they look too scandalous, and people fainting at the sight of an ankle. But the woman whose name defines that entire era was a fiery, stubborn, passionate rebel. She fought off controlling parents. She proposed to her own husband. She dodged 8 literal assassination attempts without breaking a sweat. She promoted servants above aristocrats just because she felt like it. And she ruled an empire covering a quarter of the globe while eating her favorite spicy curries. Queen Victoria was not a prude. She was an absolute force of nature who lived by her own rules and dragged the rest of the world along for the ride. So the next time someone tells you history is just a bunch of boring dates and dusty old rulers, you tell them about the goth queen who survived bullets and bad gossip to become the ultimate boss of the 19th century. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode of BrainBoost English Podcast.